squeezed that trigger inside a quiet Gowanus elevator while the metal walls caught every echo, and the man trapped beside him never walked out alive, and people later said that moment sealed his fate long before any judge spoke his name. Years later, he sat inside a cold federal courtroom, listening to prosecutors replay his own lyrics while marshals waited to ship him to a concrete box in Colorado. The same kid who once ran hallways in Gowanus ended up buried inside the hardest prison in America. This is how a Brooklyn Project baby became Rod Diggs, and how every choice he made pushed him toward 12 life sentences. Gowanus houses stood tall in the mid-'80s, with cracked hallways and stairwells soaked in a mix of fear and hustle because heroin and crack shaped the whole layout before Ronald Herron even learned to spell his name. Those red brick buildings carried sounds that never truly slept because gunshots kept bouncing between towers like unwanted echoes people learned to ignore. Kids stepped outside knowing the elevators sometimes hid dealers with scales on the floor, and that staircases could turn dangerous if the wrong person walked in behind you. Families survived with whatever they had because the projects moved on a different rhythm, bred by poverty and daily chaos. Witkoff Gardens sat a short walk away, and people treated those two projects like connected worlds because dealers and crews drifted between both spots while police patrols circled slow and suspicious. The streets taught young boys like Herron that rules came from whoever controlled the stairwells, and that regular kids needed to watch everything around them if they wanted to make it home. People hustled by the laundry rooms and playgrounds while mothers dragged tired children upstairs after long days surrounded by yelling and arguments echoing through the courtyards. The killing of Nicholas Hayward Jr. in 1994 hit that community hard because he was only 13 when a police officer shot him inside a Gowanus stairwell after mistaking a toy gun for the real thing, and many kids in the neighborhood saw the commotion afterward, including Herron, who noticed the officer crying as people gathered around the scene. That moment showed every child in those buildings that danger came from police as much as it came from dealers or rival crews, and people grew up fearing everyone with equal intensity. Parents whispered warnings about trigger-happy cops while also teaching their kids which corners to avoid when certain crews held the block. Heroin and crack money controlled entire sections of Gowanus because older dealers set up mini operations inside staircases and hallways, and every shift changed the energy of the buildings. Many adults battled addiction while their kids tried growing up inside apartments where smoke, fights, and arguments were daily routines. Ronald Herron lived through that environment with a father trapped by crack addiction and a mother charging through life off petty theft and survival instinct, so he learned responsibility early because no adult protected him from the chaos around him. Gangs started rising heavy during the mid-'90s because the Bloods and Crips culture from Rikers Island spilled back into neighborhoods, and local crews built their own sets through borrowed loyalty codes. Herron watched older kids blend the posturing of street crews with the discipline of prison-bred gang culture, and he saw how reputation moved faster than truth inside the projects. Those early petty crimes came naturally because stealing from stores or snatching small items felt easier than finding legitimate opportunities that barely existed. Fast money took hold of him young because poor kids saw no long-term plans, only the quick rewards waiting on the corner outside. Gowanus shaped him before he realized it, turning him from a quiet kid into someone who studied which dealers controlled which lobbies and which fights changed the energy of the block. That neighborhood raised him the same way it raised hundreds of others, only he paid closer attention and learned the game with a sharper focus than most kids his age. Herron caught his first serious case around 13 after a robbery that landed him inside juvenile detention, where everything moved rougher than anything he saw back home. Inside those walls, he met older Bloods members who treated the place like a small training camp where loyalty mattered more than schoolwork, and fights broke out faster than counselors could react. He learned that violence worked like currency in detention because everyone watched who stood strong and who folded under pressure. The older Bloods noticed his willingness to learn, and they coached him through codes built on respect, retaliation, and group identity. Initiation inside that facility tightened his bond with the gang because he wanted protection and belonging more than anything else at that age. He listened when older members explained survival tactics and showed him how violence shaped outcomes in their world. That short time locked up hardened him quicker than most kids, and when he returned home, he carried a new identity with him because detention turned him from a regular project kid into someone claiming Blood's ties with real conviction. Once he got back to Gowanus, he jumped straight into robberies because the skills he learned inside blended naturally with the chaotic energy outside. He started carrying guns, even though he was still a teenager, because everyone in those stairwells respected firepower more than talk. His home life stayed unstable, because addiction and poverty made every night unpredictable, and he learned to sleep light with his mind always scanning for threats or chances to make quick money. The projects became his school, workplace, and battleground because the hallways taught him how to spot danger, and the courtyard taught him how to handle confrontations. Older kids respected him for stepping fully into the life without hesitation, and younger kids studied him because he moved with confidence that separated him from regular teenagers. Heron started selling crack for extra income and quickly realized the money came faster than any job available to someone his age. That money pulled him deeper into the street system because it gave him a taste of power he never felt before. His reputation grew block by block because he handled robberies without flinching and kept a small circle of trusted friends who backed him in any confrontation. The older crews running Gowanus before him became unintentional mentors because he studied their movements and learned what mistakes got people jailed or killed. He learned from their stories how witness intimidation protected killers and how staying unpredictable kept rivals from plotting against you. Heron studied everything because he knew the streets rewarded the most aware person, not the loudest one. By 16, he already moved like a young soldier because the project shaped him into someone people noticed and respected. He handled tasks older men usually controlled because he wanted to build his own name in a world that respected only fear, money, and reputation. That ambition pushed him closer to the edge because every move he made pulled him deeper into a life that rarely offered second chances. The streets already knew Ronald Heron carried himself differently, and that difference fully showed in June 2001 when Frederick Brooks got killed near the Gowanus house's courtyard. People said Brooks moved small weight on the low, and he worked those stairwells that Rod Diggs and his circle believed belonged to their crew. One afternoon, witnesses heard a single shot near the stairwell of 423 Baltic Street, and they saw Brooks drop with a head wound that left no chance for recovery. Police arrived quickly because the projects buzzed with noise after any shooting, and officers started asking questions about who pulled the trigger. Two witnesses originally told investigators that Heron shot Brooks, and both described his face in lineup sessions with real confidence, which gave detectives strong momentum early in the case. Those statements looked solid to prosecutors because both witnesses repeated their claims in recorded interviews that matched timeline details surrounding the shooting. Everything seemed set for an easy conviction when the case moved toward Brooklyn Supreme Court, and the district attorney treated those early statements like undeniable evidence. The project residents thought the trial would remove Heron from the streets, and some people even said the police finally grabbed someone who scared the neighborhood. As the trial date approached, both witnesses switched their entire story, and they told prosecutors they could not remember who shot Brooks and that they felt uncomfortable testifying about anything. Their sudden fear became obvious because people saw them whispering more carefully around the Gowanus courtyards, and some neighbors claimed the witnesses received quiet pressure from people connected to Heron. Witness intimidation lived deep inside those buildings because everyone understood the danger of naming shooters, and silence kept people alive longer than cooperation. The climate around that trial showed how the projects handled their own issues, and witnesses knew speaking publicly created problems nobody could protect them from. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution looked lost because their entire case depended on those two voices, and once they folded, the trial collapsed piece by piece. Defense attorneys argued the witnesses were unreliable, and they pointed out every hesitation and contradiction with confident precision. Judge and jury watched the testimony fall apart in real time because the original statements no longer matched anything the witnesses said in court. That shift forced the court to dismiss the charges, and Heron walked out of the building with a level of confidence that changed how people viewed him in Gowanus. When he stepped back onto the block, people looked at him with both respect and caution because beating a murder case gave him a new image that few men achieved. People talked about how he beat a body with the same energy they use for neighborhood legends, and his name started moving through Wyckoff Gardens and Gowanus stairwells like a whispered warning. Heron understood that beating the case boosted his reputation, and he carried that reputation with a pride that shaped his future moves. His crew loved telling the story because it made him look untouchable, and that aura strengthened his influence over younger kids who watched him closely. The victory also planted seeds of future problems because law enforcement never forgot the case, and prosecutors believed intimidation played a role in the witnesses switching their stories. Detectives started paying closer attention to Heron, and they watched how he moved around the projects after the acquittal. That suspicion followed him for years, and it silently shaped the approach federal investigators used when larger cases formed in the background. The Brooks case entered project mythology because people repeated the story long after the trial ended, and every retelling made Heron sound more powerful than before. The courtroom victory gave Rod Diggs a new layer of street credibility that shaped how Gowanus residents talked about him. His reputation as someone who handled business grew stronger after that day, and young hustlers saw him as an example of someone who stayed solid under pressure. The "I beat a body" brag became a personal slogan for him, and he referenced it often enough to build a dangerous brand around his name. That moment transformed him from a rising hustler into a feared figure inside the Brooklyn projects, and the story followed him into every corner of Gowanus for many years. Right after the Brooks case faded into neighborhood gossip, Heron caught new trouble when drug charges hit him in the early 2000s because police raided multiple corners around Gowanus and snatched several dealers, including him. The courts convicted him quickly because those charges were supported by solid evidence, and the judge handed him a 6-year sentence that shipped him off to a state facility far away from his home. Prison moved slow for him because isolation shaped every day, and he spent long hours thinking about his life, his mistakes, and his future. He talked later about feeling tired of the chaos, and he said he wanted to change his path because the constant violence felt draining after a while. He planned to use rap music as a way out, and he believed his story would carry enough weight to grab real attention. Prison staff noticed him writing constantly because he created verses and ideas while locked inside those cells. The long isolation pushed him to imagine a future where music could replace the streets, and he told friends he would chase rap fully once he came home. Heron got released around 2006 or 2007, and he returned to Brooklyn with a different mindset because he tried working a regular job at the YMCA to keep himself grounded. People around him said he looked serious about staying straight, and he moved quietly through the neighborhood during his first months out. He tried blending into normal routines because he believed legitimate work could keep him safe from police and rivals. That effort showed real discipline, and many thought he turned a new page. Temptation pulled him back because fast money stayed familiar, and the streets always called louder than any paycheck. He started recording under a label called Project Music, and he filmed early videos inside the same Gowanus hallways he once hustled in. Those videos showed him walking through courtyards handing out shirts and rapping about survival because he used the projects as the main backdrop for his new identity. People watched the videos online, and his views grew because everyone recognized the locations and respected the authenticity. He linked with Uncle Murda and joined a collective called the Murder Team, and they pushed gritty music that highlighted real events from their neighborhoods. His verses blended fact with performance because he referenced shootings, robberies, and street politics with clear confidence. Those bars connected with listeners because he delivered them with the same energy people saw in him when he walked through Gowanus. The team gained momentum through raw storytelling, and Heron believed rap could fully pull him out of the cycle he lived in since childhood. Recording sessions replaced some of the street activity, and people noticed that he carried himself like someone rebuilding his future. His music captured the danger and pressure of Brooklyn street life, and his name began spreading across different corners of the borough. Even with all the progress he made through music, he still kept one foot in the projects, and that decision shaped everything waiting for him in the next chapter of his life. When Heron stepped deeper back into Gowanus after his release, he moved like someone ready to rebuild a serious structure around himself because the streets already viewed him as a proven force. He started forming a squad that people later called the Murderous Mad Dog Bloods, and that crew pulled from different corners of the projects because young hustlers wanted to stand beside someone carrying real weight. His closest circle included names like M. Moose, and Winfield, and each one played a role that kept their operation sharp and organized. Rod Diggs positioned himself as the leader because nobody else in that circle matched his reputation or influence inside Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens. Everyone around him knew he ran things with a direct style, and he expected total obedience from anyone tied to his movement. The crew built a loose hierarchy where M. handled certain drug shifts, Moose managed muscle work, and Winfield kept watch over stashes and lookout teams. Those jobs created a rhythm because each person understood where they fit and what responsibilities they handled daily. Heron enforced one main rule that shaped their whole economy, and people in both projects repeated it often, saying you either cop from raw or sell for raw. That rule meant independent dealers had no space unless they paid taxes or moved products supplied by his circle. He controlled stairwells in several buildings around the Gowanus houses, especially the towers near Hoyt Street and Baltic Street. His crew patrolled those hallways like territory because the staircases worked like small storefronts for crack and heroin sales. Independent hustlers paid taxes to operate because refusing brought trouble quickly, and many understood that working under the Murderous Mad Dog Bloods gave protection from robberies or rival dealers lurking near Wyckoff Gardens. Heron trusted fear more than diplomacy, and he used robbery as a tool to expand reach into Wyckoff Gardens, where he believed more corners could be taken. His crew used a two-strike method that started with robbing a dealer to force compliance and ended with violence if the dealer resisted or tried rebuilding independently after the first hit. Those robberies happened fast because Moose and other younger members moved aggressively when pushing into new hallways. Heron treated expansion like a business decision because he wanted both projects feeding product into his pockets. His violence played a critical role in controlling everything because people respected consistency, and Heron delivered consistent pressure whenever someone stepped outside the rules. Dealers knew that pushing back caused problems that escalated quickly, and most small hustlers preferred paying taxes rather than losing everything. Heron started wearing heavy body armor every day because he expected retaliation from rivals or frustrated dealers, and people saw him walking the courtyard with vests hidden under jackets. The armor became part of his identity because it showed how serious he took the risk of running an aggressive drug crew. Younger members followed his example and carried weapons near stairwells to keep control tight during busy drug hours. Heron enforced discipline by reminding everyone that mistakes created vulnerabilities the police or rivals could exploit. The drug economy kept their operation running because heroin and crack sales flowed daily through Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens. Heron monitored prices, supply, and daily earnings because he wanted every shift operating like a stable business. He oversaw stash houses hidden inside apartments of trusted members, and these spots held drugs, cash, and weapons for emergencies. People living in those units understood the consequences of disloyalty, and each stash location protected the crew from sudden raids or robberies. Violence acted as the currency that held everything together because the murderous Mad Dog Bloods carried a reputation that depended on ruthlessness. Heron believed fear protected the operation better than any negotiation, and he pushed his members to handle problems immediately when threats appeared. His influence grew across Gowanus because people saw how he mixed structure with aggression, and that combination made him one of the most respected and feared figures in the projects. The crew he rebuilt during those years shaped the path that led to everything waiting ahead because the structure he created eventually drew the full attention of federal investigators watching from a distance. The tension around Gowanus kept rising through 2008 because crews pushed into each other's pockets, and Heron stayed ready for any threat that challenged his control. One of those threats appeared when Richard Russo argued with members of Heron's circle, and people said the argument came from money owed and attitude shown inside one of the Gowanus buildings. Russo kept moving through the projects like he had protection, and the crew around Heron believed he disrespected the wrong people at the wrong moment. On the day of the killing, Russo stepped into an elevator inside a Gowanus building, and everyone later described how the doors closed behind him just seconds before Heron entered. Witnesses said they heard a loud pop from inside the elevator, and when someone checked, they saw Russo on the floor with a gunshot wound to his head. That scene locked into neighborhood memory because it happened inside a box where nobody could escape, and people understood how personal that type of killing looked. Two witnesses told investigators they saw Heron walking from the elevator looking calm, and detectives followed those statements for months while trying to piece together the motive. Prosecutors later repeated a lyric from a Rod Diggs track where he said he laid a man down in the elevator, and they used that line heavily during trial to frame the killing as a brag turned into art. Heron dismissed the line as entertainment, but the connection lived strong in the minds of investigators who believed the lyric matched the elevator execution almost perfectly. People inside Gowanus felt the fear immediately because Russo's death showed how quietly someone could vanish inside those buildings if they crossed the wrong crew. Some residents said Heron tossed the gun after the killing because he wanted police searching for a weapon they would never find. The lack of a recovered weapon strengthened his confidence because he believed the courts could not build a clean case without physical evidence. That year carried more violence because Moose got shot in 2008 near the projects, and the attack shook the murderous Mad Dog Bloods because Moose stayed close to Heron. Heron visited him in the hospital with cameras rolling, and he recorded a moment where he looked straight into the lens and told rivals that a cemetery sat near their location. That line traveled through Brooklyn because people understood it as a warning, and prosecutors later used that clip to show how Heron publicly tied violence to his identity. The shooting of Moose pushed Heron deeper into retaliation mode, and he believed someone tried to hurt his circle to weaken his influence. People in Wyckoff Gardens whispered about rising tension because Heron wanted answers, and he put pressure on his crew to watch every corner carefully. The streets felt heavier during those weeks because every argument or robbery carried potential for new shootings. The murder of Victor Zapata grew from that environment, and people said Zapata argued with people tied to Heron before things escalated. Zapata moved through Gowanus with confidence because he felt connected through friends and family, but that confidence faded once Heron's crew targeted him. One afternoon, a confrontation sparked, and Zapata ran through the courtyard near the Gowanus houses while people chased him with guns in hand. Witnesses told investigators that Zapata tripped near a bench while trying to escape, and the attackers caught him there with multiple shots delivered in seconds. That courtyard turned silent as soon as the shooters left because residents feared speaking to police or acknowledging anything that happened. When detectives questioned a woman who claimed to witness parts of the chase, she later reported being beaten by members of Heron's circle, and prosecutors said that beating represented a pattern of intimidation used to silence potential witnesses. These murders changed the atmosphere in Gowanus because people realized the murderous Mad Dog Bloods controlled large sections of the projects with real authority. Dealers paid taxes without complaining, and residents kept heads down when Rodriguez walked through the courtyard, wearing body armor underneath his clothes. His crew enjoyed more influence than ever, and nobody wanted to challenge a group that handled violence openly and without hesitation. The killings also attracted attention from law enforcement because prosecutors believed Heron orchestrated a pattern of murders meant to secure power inside the projects. Federal investigators started gathering complaints and reports that connected Heron to robberies, shootings, and intimidation attempts surrounding the Russo and Zapata cases. Detectives watched his music videos closely because they saw them as visual confirmations of his presence in Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens. Those murders strengthened Heron's street image, but they also guaranteed serious federal attention because authorities saw a violent structure taking shape under his leadership. The murderous Mad Dog Bloods looked powerful inside Gowanus, yet every act of violence left breadcrumbs that investigators collected carefully. The Russo elevator killing and the Zapata courtyard chase became central bricks in the case built against him, and federal agents knew they only needed time before everything around Rodriguez collapsed. Stories around Rodriguez started floating heavier as his name gained reach, and many of those stories came from people who loved talking wild whenever his cases got brought up. One of the wildest stories came from Saquon Wallace during court, where he claimed Heron once dressed like a woman to get close to a target he wanted dead. Wallace said he wore a wig, tight clothes, and makeup, and he walked through Gowanus pretending to be a woman before shooting someone. The courtroom listened closely because the story sounded like something from a movie, and tabloids posted it immediately because they loved anything that made the case sound shocking. No solid evidence backed that story, but the idea spread fast online because forums loved repeating anything that made street figures seem larger than life. People on message boards debated it constantly because they believed Heron moved unpredictable enough to pull something strange if the situation demanded it. Some argued the story felt like a jailhouse exaggeration from someone hoping to impress prosecutors, and others believed it came from older rumors that floated through the projects long before Heron faced federal charges. There were other disguised stories tied to his name because some residents claimed he switched outfits quickly whenever he wanted to slide on someone unnoticed. Those whispers described him switching jackets, hats, and shoes before slipping into another building so nobody traced his movements. People repeated these claims with quiet excitement because they loved imagining a street figure who could outsmart anyone hunting for him. Most of those claims likely grew from a mix of fear and imagination because Heron already carried a serious reputation inside the projects. Another story that circulated involved a confrontation with rapper Jim Jones outside a Manhattan club, where people said Heron confronted him about money or respect tied to someone close to their circle. The details kept changing every time someone told it, and no solid evidence proved anything happened. Some versions said Heron pressed Jones for answers, and other versions claimed the meeting happened without hostility. The streets treated that story like a legendary moment because it connected a rising Brooklyn figure with a popular Harlem rapper. More whispers came from older residents who remembered seeing Heron move through the projects with small groups of loyal young members shadowing him closely. Some claimed he carried multiple guns daily, and others believed he kept weapons hidden in different buildings for emergencies. None of those claims ever got confirmed, but people loved telling them because they added mystique to his public image. Every rumor blended into the next until they created a cloud of myth around his name, and younger kids repeated the stories like folklore. These stories helped shape Heron into a near mythical figure inside the Brooklyn rap underground, where people viewed him as someone who lived every lyric he recorded. Fans admired how his reputation felt bigger than music, and many believed he carried a presence that reached beyond ordinary street legends. The truth likely sat somewhere between real events and exaggerated retellings because jailhouse stories always stretch facts to make someone sound more dangerous or more intelligent. Many stories surrounding Heron came from unreliable narrators who mixed truth with fiction, and prosecutors sometimes leaned on these tales without fully confirming their accuracy. The stories worked against him because they painted him as someone capable of anything, and that perception influenced how the public viewed him during the long court battle. Even without proof, the myth building became powerful because people love dangerous characters with mysterious backgrounds, and Heron ended up benefiting and suffering from that attention at the same time. Raw Diggs started rising inside the underground rap scene because he created a sound that felt raw, aggressive, and directly tied to the streets he lived in. He shot many music videos inside Gowanus because he wanted viewers to see the buildings he represented, and he used the real hallways and courtyards as visual proof of his authenticity. Those videos included dozens of his crew members standing behind him with confidence because they wanted the world to understand who controlled those blocks. He passed out shirts with his name and logo around the projects because he wanted to show organizational strength, and people respected him for giving real opportunities to young kids looking for direction. The shirts created unity across certain buildings because residents felt proud to represent someone they considered a local hero. Heron embraced this identity fully, and he grew his brand through both street credibility and musical skill. His lyrics became the most controversial part of his rise because prosecutors later pulled many lines and claimed they were confessions hidden inside music. They pointed to bars where he referenced elevators, revenge, robberies, and retaliation, and they said his words matched events tied to the Russo and Zapata murders. Heron argued those lyrics were artistic exaggerations, inspired by the environment around him, and he said rap always blurred the line between truth and performance. The debate over rap lyrics being used as evidence grew quickly because many rappers believed it violated artistic freedom. Legal experts argued that using lyrics as proof created unfair prejudice since rap often included fictional violence. Prosecutors believed the overlap between Heron's real life and his lyrics felt too close to ignore, and they broke down every line in court to show intentional connections. Those lyrics became powerful leverage for the government because they made Heron look like someone bragging openly about serious crimes. His persona created serious problems during the trial because his music blended reality with entertainment, and prosecutors claimed the persona reflected his true life. Heron said the persona existed only for show, and he explained that rap artists often created exaggerated characters for effect. The court struggled to separate performance from reality because Heron's background carried documented violence, drug trafficking, and leadership roles inside a dangerous crew. Several of his music videos turned into federal exhibits during trial because investigators analyzed every frame for connections to his alleged crimes. They pointed to scenes showing Heron standing beside known murderous Mad Dog Blood's members, and they highlighted moments where weapons appeared in the background. Prosecutors argued these videos showed organizational strength and gang identity because Heron moved confidently through Gowanus while surrounded by followers. The community reacted strongly because many residents believed prosecutors used the videos unfairly, and they saw the case as government overreach against a rapper telling stories about life in the projects. Other residents believed Heron willingly exposed too much through his music and became careless once he gained recognition. The debate continued through the trial because everyone viewed the videos differently based on their personal experiences with Heron. His art fed both his popularity and his prosecution because the same content that built his fan base also provided investigators with material to support their narrative. Heron gained attention from major rappers, industry insiders, and street figures across New York because his music felt authentic and threatening. Prosecutors gained ammunition from the same work because they believed the videos and lyrics reinforced motives and actions connected to violent crimes. Heron believed music could elevate him out of the streets, but the overlap between persona and reality created complications he never escaped. The art that brought him recognition eventually fueled the case that helped bury him under life sentences, and every video recorded in Gowanus became part of the story that followed him into federal court. Everything shifted one afternoon when Heron made a tiny mistake outside the Gowanus houses because officers stopped him for tossing a gum wrapper on the ground near Hoyt Street. That moment felt small to anyone watching, but the officers treated the stop seriously because they recognized his face and decided to check him carefully. They asked routine questions while watching his movements closely, and the stop escalated when they noticed a heavy outline under his clothes that looked unusual for a regular street encounter. They searched him and found body armor strapped tight against his chest, and that discovery shocked the officers because regular residents did not walk around wearing full ballistic vests in broad daylight. That armor told them he expected danger constantly, and they believed something bigger waited behind his calm expression. When they dug deeper, they located a gun hidden nearby because Heron tried distancing himself from the weapon once he realized the search was happening. Officers retrieved the gun and logged the discovery, and that recovery marked the exact moment federal eyes started turning toward him. The DEA noticed the arrest report because the combination of body armor and illegal guns suggested a serious operation connected to more than small-time hustling. Agents read through older files tied to the Russo and Zapata murders, and they realized Heron's name kept appearing beside violent events inside Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens. They decided to take a deeper look at his activities because they believed he controlled a structured crew rather than a loose group of neighborhood associates. That interest grew quickly because they saw him blending music, leadership, and street influence in ways that threatened long-term safety in the area. Federal agents began pulling small pieces of information from different people around the projects because they wanted to understand how Heron ran his organization. They used confidential informants familiar with the murderous Mad Dog Bloods, and those informants described routines, stash locations, and roles assigned to various members. Some informants came from prison settings where rivals or former associates shared details about hierarchy and violence connected to Heron. The DEA realized his operation moved with discipline that resembled patterns found in earlier organized crime cases around New York. Wiretaps started next because agents wanted real-time confirmation of daily activities, and they targeted phones belonging to Heron's associates before expanding surveillance to additional numbers. Those recordings captured conversations about product, money flow, and internal problems, and every small detail helped agents draw lines between different events. The wiretaps also highlighted how Heron managed loyalty within the murderous Mad Dog Bloods because his crew respected him strongly and moved with caution when discussing business. Agents understood they needed more evidence, but they also recognized that the operation behaved like a coordinated unit with clear leadership. Federal agents slowly pieced everything together over months because they relied on overlapping fragments from informants, surveillance, and earlier investigations tied to murders, drugs, and intimidation attempts. They studied older crime scenes connected to the Russo and Zapata killings and matched them with information gathered from their expanded network. They built charts showing each member of Heron's crew, and they marked relationships between violence, territory control, and drug distribution patterns. Investigators compared Heron's music content with the recorded conversations to see where the lines crossed, and they believed many parts overlapped in ways that supported future charges. The move toward a RICO case gained speed once the DEA realized Heron's influence covered multiple buildings, several violent incidents, and a steady drug operation across 2 major housing projects. RICO allowed prosecutors to connect years of crimes into one large case because they needed a framework strong enough to capture the full scope of his activities. The gum wrapper stop opened the door to everything, and what looked like a petty citation turned into the key moment that shifted Heron from local threat to federal priority. The storm finally broke in early 2012 when federal prosecutors unsealed a superseding indictment that named Ronald Heron as the leader of a violent criminal organization operating inside the Gowanus houses and parts of Wyckoff Gardens. The document came from the Eastern District of New York, and it laid out a racketeering structure that traced years of shootings, robberies, drug sales, and intimidation connected to the murderous Mad Dog Bloods. The indictment listed 23 counts against him, and those charges included racketeering conspiracy, murder, attempted murder, drug trafficking, robbery, and witness tampering. The federal government made it clear that they believed Heron stood at the top of the organization, and they wanted to prove that every violent act tied back to his leadership. Prosecutors spent years building this case because they collected information from state cases, sealed files, old homicide investigations, and a growing roster of informants. They pulled evidence from the Russo killing in 2008 and matched it with details provided by witnesses who claimed they saw Heron near the elevator shortly before the gunshot. They reviewed the Zapata case and interviewed people who saw parts of the chase through the courtyard. They examined the gum wrapper arrest that uncovered body armor and the hidden gun. They reviewed jail calls, street conversations captured through wiretaps, and statements from former crew members who wanted lighter sentences. Every piece gathered strength over time because prosecutors stacked incidents together until they believed they formed an unbreakable pattern. One important advantage for prosecutors came from the judge allowing evidence of witness intimidation into the case because they argued Heron used threats and violence to silence anyone who watched his crimes. The judge ruled that decades of project culture played a role in witness fear, and he said prosecutors could show examples where people felt pressured to stay quiet. This ruling damaged Heron because it allowed the government to argue that weaknesses in earlier cases came from intimidation, not innocence. That argument strengthened the racketeering structure because it made every unsolved or weakened case look connected to his leadership. Pre-trial moves lasted months because both sides fought over what evidence could appear in court. Prosecutors wanted music lyrics, videos, gang history, and old testimony included, Defense attorneys wanted the court to treat Herron as a musician whose art did not reflect reality. They argued that videos showed creativity, not confession. They argued that rap culture used exaggeration for entertainment, and they said the government unfairly targeted artists from poor neighborhoods who used music to escape poverty. Prosecutors responded by saying Herron blurred fiction and reality because he referenced events that matched violent actions described by witnesses. The courtroom felt tense on the first day because marshals positioned themselves around the room and reporters filled the benches. The judge sat high above the room while jurors looked around with curiosity and caution because they understood the weight of this trial. Herron walked in wearing a suit and carrying a serious expression because he wanted to show confidence rather than fear. The government called their first witnesses quickly because they wanted momentum from the start. One of the star witnesses was Winfield, a former member of the murderous Mad Dog Bloods, who admitted taking part in robberies and shootings under Herron's leadership. He told the jury how the crew operated daily, and he described the stairwell tax system that forced independent dealers to pay for space. He said Herron ran every major decision because people looked to him for permission and direction. His testimony shocked the room because he described real moments of violence that placed Herron at the center of several events. Saquon Wallace also testified, and he brought the dramatic story about the alleged disguise Herron used during the killing. Prosecutors treated the story cautiously because no physical evidence supported it, yet they believed his testimony helped paint a picture of Herron's ability to evade capture. Wallace described several interactions with Herron and claimed he witnessed actions connected to the Russo and Zapata killings. His testimony matched parts of the racketeering charges, and the government used it to strengthen their narrative. Another witness, Caraballo, explained how the drug operation moved through the projects and said Herron monitored supply, enforced discipline, and handled disputes personally. He described stash houses, crack packaging, and daily movement through stairwells filled with lookouts. His testimony reinforced the idea that the murderous Mad Dog Bloods existed as a structured organization with Herron fully controlling operations. Prosecutors played several music videos in court, and the room watched as Herron appeared on screen surrounded by large groups of supporters wearing matching shirts that promoted his name. The videos showed him standing in courtyards, sitting on staircases, and rapping inside hallways that federal agents recognized from their surveillance files. Prosecutors paused specific moments when guns appeared in the background because they wanted the jury to see connections between the videos and the violence described by witnesses. They also performed a line-by-line lyrical breakdown for the jury, focusing on bars where Herron mentioned elevators, retaliation, revenge, and specific street actions. They argued these lyrics matched the patterns of the Russo and Zapata killings. Defense attorneys tried to explain rap as performance, but prosecutors told the jury that Herron built his persona from real violence that he committed, not fiction. The breakdown lasted hours because prosecutors wanted the jury to see each lyric as a coded message tied to his real actions. Midway through the trial, Herron made the risky decision to testify in his own defense because he wanted to explain his lyrics, his past choices, and his rap persona directly to the jury. He told them he grew up around violence and used those experiences in his music. He said the persona of Rod Diggs existed as a separate character meant for entertainment, and he said the government misunderstood how rappers communicated their art. He denied committing the murders and said informants lied to protect themselves. His explanation carried the emotion because he spoke about childhood struggles, addiction in his home, and the poverty that shaped his early life. He said he used rap to escape that world, and he said the streets misunderstood his intentions. He told the jury he wore body armor because people threatened him, not because he ran a violent organization. Defense attorneys asked him questions that allowed him to humanize himself, and he appeared calm during most of the testimony. Cross-examination shifted the energy instantly because prosecutors attacked every part of his story. They questioned him about the elevator killing and asked why his lyrics described the scene so closely. They questioned him about the Zapata chase and pointed out evidence that matched witness testimony. They played videos showing him surrounded by armed associates and asked whether the guns in the footage belonged to his crew. Herron denied many details, but the prosecutors pressed hard because they believed his testimony contradicted earlier statements. The jury watched the tension closely because the government forced him into corners he struggled to escape. Closing arguments lasted several hours because each side wanted to shape the jury's final impression. Prosecutors emphasized the structure of the murderous Mad Dog Bloods and repeated claims that Herron led a violent organization responsible for multiple murders and years of intimidation. They said his music offered a window into his pride and lack of remorse. They said the witnesses provided consistent details once viewed together. Defense attorneys said the government built a case on unreliable witnesses who received benefits and they said the lyrics should not count as evidence. They argued Herron never ordered murders, and his leadership role came from exaggerated stories. The jury entered deliberation with stacks of documents, hundreds of notes, and many hours of testimony weighing on them. They requested transcripts for several witnesses, asked for specific exhibits, and reviewed video evidence multiple times. After hours of quiet discussion, the jury reached a unanimous conviction on all major counts, including racketeering, murder, and drug trafficking. The courtroom stayed silent when the foreperson read the verdict, and Herron stared forward without expression as each count confirmed his fate. Public reaction came quickly because the story spread through Brooklyn, the broader hip-hop scene, and various online forums. Some residents of Gowanus said the conviction removed a serious threat from the neighborhood, and they believed the projects felt safer. Supporters said the government unfairly targeted a rapper who created a persona based on music industry expectations. Debates lasted for years because the case represented more than a conviction, and people argued over the links between rap, reality, and federal prosecution. The RICO storm reshaped his entire legacy because the trial placed him in history as one of the most heavily prosecuted street figures in modern Brooklyn. The day of sentencing felt heavy inside the Eastern District courtroom because everyone understood the weight of the charges and the long list of violent acts placed on Ronald Herron's shoulders. Judge Nicholas Gowanus walked in with a serious expression because he already reviewed the evidence, the witness testimony, and the recordings, and he came prepared to speak directly about what he believed Herron represented inside Brooklyn. The judge said the violence tied to Herron destroyed families and traumatized entire housing projects, and he said the leadership role Herron held inside the murderous Mad Dog Bloods placed him at the center of serious destruction. He spoke slowly and made sure every word reached the defendant clearly. Herron stood there listening carefully, and when he finally got a chance to speak, he said the court punished him for a rap persona that did not represent his true self. He said the lyrics played in court came from entertainment, not confession. And he said the government twisted art into evidence just to create a villain they already believed existed. He said he grew up in poverty and violence, and he said the system ignored the struggles that shaped him from childhood into adulthood. His voice carried frustration because he believed the trial never separated Ronald Herron from Rod Diggs, and he said the government punished him for a character meant for music. Judge Gowanus said the jury convicted him because of evidence, not image, and he reminded the court that multiple murders, robberies, and drug operations were tied directly to Herron through witness testimony and physical proof. The judge believed Herron ran a dangerous organization and caused harm that deserved the harshest punishment available under federal law. When the judge announced 12 life sentences plus 105 additional years, the courtroom went silent because the total crushed any hope of release. Marshall stood near Herron as the sentence echoed across the room, and he nodded slightly even though his face stayed calm. After sentencing, the Bureau of Prisons classified Herron for placement inside the highest security level available in the United States, and they selected ADX Florence in Colorado because they believed his influence and history made him a threat inside regular penitentiaries. The transfer happened quietly because the government wanted minimal attention, and soon he arrived at the facility commonly called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. ADX Florence held inmates the government considered the most dangerous or most influential, and Herron entered those gates knowing he faced a level of isolation he never experienced before. Officials placed him in Range 13, a section designed for inmates with special administrative measures, also known as SAMs. These restrictions controlled communication heavily because the government believed certain inmates could influence violence or send coded messages beyond the facility walls. SAMs limited letters, visits, phone calls, and interactions with other inmates, and every message went through strict screening before leaving the building. Herron lived inside a concrete cell with a solid steel door, a small window, and furniture built from concrete blocks. His daily view rarely changed because the window allowed only a narrow slice of outside light. The daily routine inside ADX Florence followed a rigid structure. Herron spent around 23 hours inside his cell every day, and the remaining hour took place inside a small recreation cage that looked like a fenced concrete room, with sky visible only through overhead bars. Meals arrived through a slot in the door, and communication with staff stayed limited. Inmates under SAMs had no group interaction, and the silence created a pressure that grew stronger as weeks turned into months. The monotony shaped time differently for him because each day repeated the same pattern without variation. The psychological toll weighed heavy because isolation created a mental grind that forced inmates to battle boredom, frustration, and loneliness. Some inmates lost track of time because the days blended together, and Herron faced that same challenge inside his cell. He wrote letters when allowed, and those letters carried a calmer tone than his courtroom statements. He mentioned focus, discipline, self-control, and acceptance, and he wrote about keeping his mind sharp despite constant isolation. Some letters circulated online because supporters shared them with bloggers, and they showed a man trying to stay grounded while trapped inside extreme confinement. Herron pushed several appeals because he believed prosecutors used rap lyrics unfairly and said the trial allowed unreliable witnesses to create exaggerated stories. His lawyers argued that lyrics counted as artistic expression protected under the First Amendment, and they said the court damaged his defense by allowing creative language to function as factual confession. They argued that informants received benefits for testimony, and they challenged the evidence structure behind the racketeering charges. Each appeal presented arguments claiming the trial included bias against rap culture, and they said the prosecution misunderstood the separation between persona and reality. The appeals moved slowly through the federal system, and judges reviewed transcripts, exhibits, videos, and jury instructions. Each appellate panel upheld the conviction because they concluded the evidence extended far beyond lyrics and rested on testimony, physical proof, and a pattern of actions consistent with criminal leadership. The court said the lyrics simply supported other evidence rather than acted as the primary foundation. Herron continued filing motions and petitions, but every attempt failed because judges believed the trial followed proper legal standards. The legal debate around using rap lyrics in court expanded beyond his case because activists, musicians, and scholars pointed to his conviction as an example of how prosecutors sometimes used art unfairly. They argued the practice encouraged stereotypes about black artists who use violent imagery to describe their surroundings. Several law journals cited Herron's case when discussing the intersection of hip-hop, criminal justice, and artistic freedom. Prosecutors defended their approach by saying they used the lyrics because they matched specific criminal acts described by witnesses. That debate continues today because the legal system still struggles with the tension between creative expression and potential self-incrimination. Herron remains inside ADX Florence with no possibility of release because 12 life sentences guarantee he will spend his remaining years under heavy restrictions. His story sits inside a complicated intersection of crime, music, myth, and prosecution, and his isolation inside a Colorado Supermax prison represents the final stage of a life shaped by the same violence he once rapped about. When Herron disappeared into ADX Florence, the murderous Mad Dog Bloods lost the center of their structure, and the crew fell apart slowly because the younger members did not carry the same control or leadership skills. M. Dot received a long federal sentence for drug charges tied to the operation, and his years locked away removed one of the strongest lieutenants Herron ever trusted. Winfield received his own heavy sentence after cooperating during trial, and people inside Gowanus viewed him differently once they learned he testified. Moose received time for various charges connected to the crew, and his absence removed another piece of the inner circle. Each member faced sentences that stretched across decades, and the removal of those names fractured the organization permanently. The gang splintered because nobody stepped up with enough influence to hold the remaining pieces together. After Herron's conviction, the younger members tried maintaining operations in some buildings, but they lacked the discipline and reputation needed to enforce rules. Other crews in Brooklyn watched this shift closely because the disappearance of a dominant leader always created space for new groups to rise. Smaller cliques inside Gowanus began forming their own identities, and several new younger crews emerged with different approaches to hustling. Some followed older traditions by holding territory, and others used social media to build networks that moved faster and less predictably. Gowanus changed heavily in the years following Herron's sentencing because New York City pushed rezoning plans that encouraged development around the canal and parts of the housing projects. Construction companies bought land and built new apartments that brought wealthier residents into the area. Restaurants and art spaces appeared near streets that once held open-air drug markets, and the neighborhood shifted from a place known for violence into an emerging hub for young professionals. Many longtime residents felt conflicted because the change improved safety, yet it erased parts of the community's history, including the painful era shaped by violence and poverty. Some older residents remembered the years when Herron walked through the courtyards with confidence, and they spoke about him with mixed feelings. They said he brought fear, but also protected some families from rival crews and outside threats. Others recalled him as a dangerous figure who controlled stairwells and punished anyone who refused to follow his rules. Conversations about him remained divided because some people viewed him as someone shaped by harsh conditions, and others viewed him as someone who used those conditions to justify destructive actions. Community activism strengthened after his removal because residents wanted younger generations to avoid the same path that consumed Herron and his crew. Youth programs expanded inside Gowanus, and mentors spoke to kids about violence, incarceration, and peer pressure. Many activists referenced the case of Nicholas Hayward Jr. because they believed the loss of that child represented a turning point for families who wanted safer communities. They used his story to show how quickly tragedy shaped lives and how important it felt to protect children from danger on every side. In hip-hop culture, Heron's name lived on because fans debated whether he could have reached national success if legal troubles did not block his path. Some people believed he had the voice, look, and story needed to break through the underground scene and gain mainstream attention. Others said his music felt too tied to real violence to ever thrive inside the larger industry. The debate highlighted the complicated relationship between street credibility and commercial growth, and Heron became a symbol of what happens when those two worlds collide without balance. His story carries strength as a cautionary tale because it shows how ego, image, and loyalty to the street code often push talented people into danger they cannot escape. Heron built a powerful reputation that increased his influence, yet that same reputation attracted heavy federal attention and destroyed his future. He believed the persona of Rod Diggs could elevate him, but the persona became evidence used to bury him under life sentences. His life started inside poverty during the mid-bad 80s and ended inside the most secure prison in the country, and that journey represents a cycle many communities still struggle to break.